Considering all the sequels Hollywood puts out these days, it's a wonder that any sequel to a successful movie fails to get made. Yet these never made it to the screen, and we have the reasons why.
In 2009, District 9 became the surprise hit movie of the year. On a budget of just $30 million, the movie went on to make $210 million at the worldwide box office and was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Motion Picture. Although it didn't win any Oscars, District 9's breakout success was an impressive feat for an indie sci-fi film out of South Africa, with a first-time writer-director that featured no movie stars. So, why wasn't a sequel to District 9 ever made? According to District 9 mastermind Neil Blomkamp, he wasn't even thinking about making a sequel while writing, directing, and editing the film. Since Blomkamp was only planning on making a standalone film, he didn't set up the overall story arc for a sequel or a franchise. It was only after the film was edited that Blomkamp realized there was room for a sequel. But he still had no idea where that sequel would go. He also toyed around with making a prequel instead. Blomkamp told Hero Complex in 2010, "I'm not so interested in aliens coming back and blowing things up, but a prequel might be interesting." Obviously, that idea never left the ground either, and it wasn't until 2015 that Blomkamp said that he had a really cool idea for a District 9 sequel. Does that mean that a sequel is finally on the way? At the moment, it doesn't look likely. In a perfect world, production on a District 9 sequel would have started shortly after the first one was released. However, without an idea for the sequel, Blomkamp instead used the success of District 9 to get another original sci-fi film into production within months of District 9's release. That movie was Elysium, which he worked on until late 2012. While shooting Elysium, Blomkamp and his wife/co-screenwriter Terry Tatchell wrote the script for Chappie in 2 weeks, and after Elysium wrapped, they immediately started working on that. Production on that movie lasted into 2014, and it was released in theaters in February 2015. So yeah, those movies kept Blomkamp pretty busy post-District 9. Blomkamp told Rolling Stone that if he were to do the sequel properly, it would take 3 years to make. That's a big-time commitment, all while the movie that set it all off recedes into fans' memories. Chappie was released in May 2015, and although there hasn't been much news about the director since then, Blomkamp has definitely been busy. In April 2017, Blomkamp revealed on Twitter that he would be making experimental short films for the video game platform Steam. That's a big change from big-budget sci-fi flicks. Although at this point in his career, it's certainly less risky than taking a chance on a sequel to District 9. Blomkamp was also briefly attached to direct a 5th entry in the Alien series, going so far as to release tantalizing unofficial concept art on Instagram, but unfortunately, that project probably isn't happening. In 2017, Blomkamp tweeted the awful truth: the chances of his Alien movie ever moving forward are slim, echoing an earlier tweet that the movie was set aside pending the success or failure of Alien Covenant. That doesn't mean that Blomkamp's blockbuster days are over. After all, this wouldn't be the first time Blomkamp has bounced back after being sidelined on a high-profile film project. Originally, Blomkamp was picked by Peter Jackson to direct a movie based on the Halo video game franchise. When Halo fell through, Jackson agreed to produce District 9 based on Blomkamp's 2006 short film Alive in Joburg. In other words, the fact that Blomkamp hasn't made a movie for several years now doesn't mean that a District 9 sequel will never happen, although it seems to be getting less and less likely. Although he looks different at the end of the film, Sholto Copley is the face of District 9. In his breakout role as a delightfully clueless bureaucrat, the South African actor wowed international audiences and launched his Hollywood career.
But I don't trust it, you know, I don't trust anything that...
Are you alright, bro? Vickers, you alright, eh?
After Chappie, Copley's third collaboration with Neil Blomkamp, the actor went on to star in the PlayStation series Powers and the action thriller Free Fire. As busy as he is though, Copley has made it clear that he'd gladly reprise his role if a District 9 sequel ever materialized. District 9 ended on a cliffhanger, and the universe of the film is rich with themes and storylines to explore. Copley wants to do a sequel, and the movie was a huge success for Peter Jackson's production company. In Hollywood, that combination usually adds up to a guaranteed sequel, and yet the furthest in development that District 9 sequel ever got was an 18-page treatment. One reason for that may be because District 9 was too big of a hit. Its commentary on social segregation, xenophobia, and racism blended perfectly with its sci-fi aesthetic, all of which helped it make it an overwhelming success for the first-time writer-director. That's a hard act to follow, even when the act you're following is your own. Not long after the Twilight saga concluded, Summit Entertainment geared up for its next young adult franchise, Ender's Game. Based on the Orson Scott Card novel of the same name, Ender's Game was envisioned as the first in a series of new sci-fi films. After all, there's a ton of written material to draw from. But the series got canned long before its completion. Hollywood is a business. People tend to forget that sometimes. Studio executives would love to make whatever movies they want, but they have to make sure they'll make their money back. And then some. So when Ender's Game grossed a mere $125.5 million worldwide, against a production budget of $110 million, that showed Lionsgate that audiences weren't willing to put up with an Ender's Game franchise. Variety called it one of the biggest box office bombs of the year. With that kind of response, few studios would be willing to jump onto a sequel. There are countless reasons why a movie would flop at the box office, but for this particular film, an argument can be made that Orson Scott Card's views on homosexuality and the legalization of same-sex marriage led a number of people, especially those who are on the fence about seeing Ender's Game, to boycott the movie altogether. It's impossible to say how much of an impact the boycotts had on the movie's box office take, but there's no denying that in a politically charged climate, any negative press against a film like Ender's Game couldn't have helped. Budget constraints are an ordinary occurrence in Hollywood, but it's almost never a good thing when it happens. For instance, 20th Century Fox kept the budget low for James Mangold's Logan because the director and Hugh Jackman wanted the film to be rated R. While that ended up working in their favor, a studio usually constrains a movie's budget if it doesn't seem like the film will be as successful as initially hoped. That rings true for the would-be Ender's Game sequel. The first movie had a production budget of $110 million, a fairly typical amount for a sci-fi flick, but the sequel might have seen that number dip below the $100 million mark. Director Gavin Hood originally wanted to film the first and second movies back-to-back, but Lionsgate wasn't up for that much of a gamble. Hood said, "It's a pity on many levels because that cast was all there. The sets are all there. We should have shot the two movies back-to-back." Before superhero movies fully took over Hollywood, each studio was attempting to launch its own young adult franchise to snag some of the success of Twilight, The Hunger Games, and Harry Potter. Some were successful, but most weren't. And at this point, young adult adaptations are a tired trend that audiences no longer seem interested in paying for. Beautiful Creatures flopped, as did The Mortal Instruments, and even initially successful YA franchises like the Divergent series suffered insanely diminishing returns. Young adult adaptations can be successful if budgets are kept low, and if the movies are marketed properly. Unfortunately, every studio wants to believe they're sitting on a gold mine, so they go full steam ahead with the first installment, which, in the case of Ender's Game, leaves little room for expansion in the sequel. As Gavin Hood explained to Hyperbole, the proposed film sequel to Ender's Game would have been based on Ender's Shadow, which takes place concurrently with the first book. So if the studio really wanted to adapt that story, it would have made more sense to film back-to-back, as Gavin Hood originally wanted to. Several years have passed, and now Asa Butterfield and Haley Steinfeld are far older than their preteen characters in the books. Butterfield has starred in several other young adult-oriented movies, such as Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children and The Space Between Us, while Steinfeld is branching out in movies like the Pitch Perfect series and The Edge of 17. It makes no sense to continue the series at this stage. Then there are the bigger actors like Harrison Ford, Ben Kingsley, and Viola Davis. With Ford returning to his iconic characters in recent years, he would be a difficult person to nail down for the young adult sequel. To get all these people together again would likely require more money than Lionsgate would be willing to cough up. Even if Lionsgate and the cast were to consider a sequel, could the studio afford it? Hood made no secret about having difficulties obtaining enough money for Ender's Game. If he was having trouble getting $110 million in 2013, he's not going to be able to get enough money now. And remember, there are several novels continuing Ender's story, and even more in the Shadow and Formic War series. With so much material, the franchise could work better as a television series instead of a feature film franchise. Hey, it worked out pretty well for Game of Thrones. In fact, shortly after the movie released in theaters, Variety reported that the studio was considering a TV spin-off instead of a sequel. Since there were issues getting the necessary money for the first movie, and it didn't do so well at the box office, it makes sense for the studio to look at other options. Unfortunately, there haven't been any updates on the TV front since that report in 2013. So, who knows if it'll ever happen. Based on the series of popular Saturday Night Live sketches about metalhead Wayne Campbell and his shy best friend Garth, 1992's Wayne's World was a smash hit and a cultural phenomenon. It spawned catchphrases galore.
Swing! Swing!
and put Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody back on the pop charts. The respectable Wayne's World 2 was released in 1993, and that was just about it from Wayne and Garth. Will there ever be a Wayne's World 3? Paramount Pictures, the studio behind Wayne's World, presumably lost a lot of interest in a third installment after taking a look at the box office receipts for Wayne's World 2. While it certainly has its funny and memorable moments, it didn't quite capture the magic of the original. Critics thought it was fine, but not as good as the first Wayne's World, and it only made $47 million at the domestic box office, which was far less impressive than the original's $121 million take.
No stairway. Denied.
It all added up to a lack of evident demand for Wayne's World 3, and Hollywood wasn't going to put up the tens of millions of dollars required to make it happen. After the phenomenal success of Wayne's World, a slew of full-length movies based on Saturday Night Live sketches and characters were released, and not one of them managed to come anywhere near the box office bucks the first Wayne's World earned. Coneheads, It's Pat, Stuart Saves His Family, Blues Brothers 2000, A Night at the Roxbury, Superstar, and The Ladies' Man were all SNL-inspired duds that made a combined total of $111 million in theaters, less than Wayne's World amassed by itself. The subgenre died until 2010, when Will Forte's MacGyver send-up MacGruber hit theaters, and bombed. So, overall, there just hasn't been much of a demand for movies based on sketches people can watch at home for free, and that includes more Wayne's World. The late 90s or early noughts would have been the right time to strike quickly with another Wayne's World movie, but Mike Myers was simply too busy with other projects. After Wayne's World 2, Myers regrouped and came up with another over-the-top irresistible character, Austin Powers, a British spy straight out of a candy-colored 60s British spy movie.
Yeah, baby!
The first movie in the series, Austin Powers International Man of Mystery, was a modest hit, but built up such a huge home video following that the 1999 sequel, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, made more than $200 million at the box office. The third movie, 2002's Austin Powers and Goldmember, did even better, making those movies along with voicing the main character in the Shrek series and taking roles in films like 54 and Mystery, Alaska, didn't leave a lot of time for Myers to do much else. The success of Austin Powers can be partially blamed for why there was never a third Wayne's World movie. The character of Dr. Evil parodied several James Bond villains, particularly the similar-looking Blofeld of You Only Live Twice. But his clipped speaking voice, distant demeanor, and some physical mannerisms, including extending his pinky finger while talking, may have also been inspired by Dana Carvey's around the studio impression of their old SNL boss, Lorne Michaels.
That thing.
Yeah.
And then, when I saw Mike do it, I did kind of go,
That, along with other issues, drove a wedge between the two actors, who didn't speak for years as a result of their tiff. Happily, they've since made up and have appeared at Wayne's World screenings and on SNL together. Carvey wasn't physically available to make Wayne's World 3 when it would have most logically entered production, sometime in the mid to late 90s. Nor was he able to do much work at all. He had some major health problems. Experiencing chest pains, Carvey went to a doctor, where it was discovered that blood wasn't properly flowing to his heart.
Hey, come here. Look at this x-ray. Your heart looks like a pig's ass. Look at that thing.
Carvey underwent several operations to correct the disorder, including a botched operation where his doctor fixed the wrong artery, but has since made a full recovery. Probably the biggest reason why Wayne's World 3 has never happened is that Mike Myers doesn't seem to want to do it all that much. In 2008, Myers and Dana Carvey appeared as Wayne and Garth at the MTV Movie Awards, leaving many fans to wonder if a third big screen outing was in the offing. But Myers said he did it mainly to get caught up with his old friend Carvey. 3 years later, Carvey hosted Saturday Night Live and brought in Myers for a Wayne's World sketch. That reportedly sparked something in Myers, because in 2012, sources reported that he'd written a screenplay for Wayne's World 3, but Myers' team sent out a notice to refute it all, claiming he hadn't completed a script, nor was he even working on one. Myers and Carvey played Wayne and Garth again for the SNL 40 special in 2015. It sparked movie rumors that Myers good-naturedly shrugged off. When asked by the Canadian press if there were more Wayne's World films in the future, he said he was open to the idea, but that we shouldn't hold our breath, explaining, "It would be an interesting examination of Wayne at 50. I don't know what it would look like, but the idea of it makes me laugh, and Dana and I had a blast at the 40th anniversary, so I don't know."
There have to be more tombs out there in need of raiding, so why didn't 2018's Tomb Raider ever lead to another adventure? You can thank Amazon for that. Tomb Raider was one of the hottest video game series of the 1990s, centering on Lara Croft, a relic hunting adventurer. The first film adaptation of the Tomb Raider franchise was Angelina Jolie's 2001 adventure flick. It earned a healthy $273 million at the box office, a solid take for a turn-of-the-millennium action movie, and enough to get a sequel quickly greenlit. In 2018, the baton was passed to Alicia Vikander's Tomb Raider reboot, and it earned almost the exact same amount, yet there's been no follow-up since. But the reason why is more complicated than ticket sales. A sequel was in the works for a 2021 release, but it quickly hit a snag with the outbreak of COVID-19 in early 2020, just as things were apparently ramping up. Vikander was repeatedly asked about the sequel, and in a chat with Collider in 2021, she seemed unsure if it was still going to happen, explaining, "Pre-COVID, I would have said yes. And now I think it's a yes still. It's not greenlit, but the script is in the making, and I think everyone is excited, and I would love to revisit Lara again." Those delays may have cost them a sequel, because in 2022, Amazon acquired MGM, which forced the franchise into a complicated legal limbo, and the rights lapsed. An anonymous studio source told The Wrap there was a pre-negotiated ticking clock that had been agreed to, and there was no way to rescue it in time. MGM asked the rights holders for more time, but their patience had run out. Even though Tomb Raider was met with decidedly mixed reviews upon its release, it has achieved a mild cult status with fans who would love to see Vikander back as Lara Croft in a second movie. And it seems the filmmakers and its cast would love nothing more than to reunite for another go. In 2021, Lovecraft Country creator Misha Green signed up to write and direct a sequel.
Howdy Tomb Raider fans, my name is Misha Green and I'm the writer-director of the upcoming Tomb Raider movie.
Vikander seemed particularly pumped about the prospect of working with her, telling Entertainment Weekly in 2021, "I hope we go and make another movie. Because of the pandemic, we had plans of shooting this film, and now it's been 1.5 years. But Misha Green is on board and she's writing a draft right now." Ever hopeful, Vikander seemed ready to strap on the guns and get back to adventuring, adding, "It would be so amazing if we get to go and do this very big-ass film together, going to kick some ass in front of the camera and behind the camera." A year later, though, Vikander's tone shifted, and she cautioned that the odds were stacked against them, telling MovieZine in 2022, "I'm good at going back to that role, and it would mean a lot of training. Now it's a lot of talk considering that Amazon has bought MGM, and after the pandemic, there is so much politics. So right now, I actually do not really know what is happening." If there's going to be a Tomb Raider sequel, it would of course have to star Alicia Vikander. As far back as 2019, with the sequel already in early development, there wasn't actually concrete word on whether Vikander would reprise the role, with people reporting that it was still unclear whether she'd be back. But that question was answered when the actress officially signed up, and she began speaking about the sequel publicly. Sadly, most of her comments were regarding its long delay. Beyond Vikander, there isn't much known about who else from the cast might have reappeared in this proposed sequel, though an unverified report in 2020 did suggest that Kristen Scott Thomas would return and that she'd have a much meatier role. The actress had played a smaller part as Anna Miller, Lara's mentor and a colleague of her father in the 2018 film. Anna is a bigger bad in the video games, and according to the rumor, she would have been bumped up to the main villain for the sequel, which had been teased at the close of the first film.
You can pick up where he left off.
Tomb Raider was helmed in 2018 by a relatively unknown Norwegian filmmaker named Roar Uthaug, who a few years later directed the cult hit Troll. The script was penned by Geneva Robertson Dworet in her feature film debut, alongside co-writers Evan Darty and Alistair Siddons. Robertson Dworet went on to work on Captain Marvel, but neither she nor Uthaug were expected to return for the second Tomb Raider film after it began development. Instead, writer Amy Jump was signed in 2019 to pen the second film, and Ben Wheatley inked a deal to sit in the director's chair. But as the delays on the film began to pile up, the studio made significant changes to the crew behind the camera, which saw both Amy Jump and Ben Wheatley dismissed from the project. Replacing them was Misha Green, who was announced to both write and direct the sequel in 2021, though no reason was given as to the swap in filmmakers. Nevertheless, Green got right to work, and by May, she was telling her following on Twitter that the first draft of the script was complete, but that there was still a long journey to production. Long, in this instance, was a hell of an understatement.
You might as well tie a stone to your foot and jump off the boat now.
Though it took more than a year after Tomb Raider was released before the studio was ready to commit to a sequel, they finally did put the wheels in motion in 2019. In fact, rumor has it that the Tomb Raider sequel came fairly close to beginning production. A November 2019 report from HN Entertainment claimed that Vikander was signed on. The script was ready to go, and the studio was locking down locations for shooting. Per that same report, which was seemingly never confirmed by any of the major trades, MGM Studios was preparing to bring the production back to the UK, where much of the first movie was filmed. Warner Brothers' Leavesden Studios was even said to be the place where they would set up shop for the sequel before it all fell apart. What's known for a fact is that this version of the movie was supposed to start shooting in early 2020, although pandemic-related shutdowns forced the project to be put on hold, and then its release date was taken off the calendar altogether. It wouldn't be until 2021 that it got back up and running. By then, Green was the writer and director of record, and her version of the film was also further along than some fans may realize. As it happens, it even had a title, Tomb Raider Obsidian, and Vikander was expressing excitement over an imminent production start that never came. Nobody but those involved know what the sequel would have been about when it was under the stewardship of writer Amy Jump and director Ben Wheatley. However, some word has trickled out over the years of what might have happened in the version written by Green, cobbled together from various tidbits that leaked during its development and after the film was shuttered. In addition to talk that Kristen Scott Thomas would return in a bigger role as the main villain of the film, audiences also got a brief glimpse of some of the action in late 2022, when storyboard artist Jake Lunt Davies posted a series of images that he'd created for the project on Twitter. What they revealed didn't give away too much of the plot, but they did showcase a pulse-pounding sequence that may have kicked off the story, with a daring attack on Croft Manor carried out by shadowy agents. Given the ending of the 2018 Tomb Raider and the rumored larger role for Anna Williams, it's possible this raid was orchestrated by Lara Croft's mentor, sparking a quest that would take her to various locations to get to the truth. After snagging the rights to a Tomb Raider adaptation, the folks at Amazon have revealed they'll be crafting a big screen reboot. But that isn't all. The film will be just one part of a larger tapestry, and they have plans to turn the franchise into a full-fledged cinematic universe. To make that happen, they have announced that a Tomb Raider TV series is in the works as a streaming original, with plans for the show and film to be tightly integrated with both each other and the already announced video game relaunch. Even more exciting is that spearheading the effort behind the scenes will be Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the three-time Emmy Award-winning creator and writer of Fleabag, star of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and co-writer of the 2021 James Bond film No Time to Die. According to the trades, Waller-Bridge will write the series, but is unlikely to be involved in the film. And while many fans may have jumped to the conclusion that she might play Lara Croft too, that doesn't appear to be the case. One actor who has stepped up to volunteer for the title role is Michaela J. Rodriguez, who told Variety, "I would like to tackle a role like Lara Croft. I would love to do that because I have the badassness and sex appeal to make people love it. If not, I would also love to be Lara Croft's right-hand girl who gets just as much airtime and is right next to her killing it." With a cinematic universe on its way that will reboot the franchise with an all-new cast and crew, it might seem like a sequel to 2018's Tomb Raider has no chance of ever seeing the light of day. But if one steps back and takes stock of the Hollywood landscape, they'll see that a return to that universe isn't really far-fetched, and it could actually still happen, even if it's not anytime soon. After all, recent films like Spider-Man No Way Home and The Flash have seen the return of actors who audiences thought they'd said goodbye to decades ago, with both Tobey Maguire and Michael Keaton returning as Spider-Man and Batman.
Versus Angelina Jolie. That would be a cool film.
And while there's very, very little chance that Amazon would use a multiverse gimmick to have previous Lara Crofts meet, although that's what studios all seem to think the fans want, the idea of returning to the continuity of a previous movie even after a reboot isn't without precedent itself. The Terminator and Halloween franchises both did just that, after all. From the sounds of it, even star Alicia Vikander would still be up for reprising the role years down the line. Vikander told Variety in 2023, For me, that was another one of those childhood dreams. To portray an action character was awesome and beyond what I ever thought I would do. And I think the physical part is something that I really enjoyed. So yeah, if another opportunity like that came again, I'll be interested.
Marvel has a new crown jewel with the massively popular and critically acclaimed Black Panther, movie number 18 in the massive Marvel Cinematic Universe. But if Wesley Snipes had gotten his way in the 1990s, his cinematic take on the comic would have predated them all. The actor opened up to The Hollywood Reporter in January 2018 about his experiences trying and failing to get a Black Panther movie off the ground. Snipes was first approached by Marvel for a Black Panther adaptation in the early 90s, when he'd just arrived as a major force in Hollywood. He says it didn't take much convincing to get him attracted to the project. It had cultural significance, social significance. It was something that the black community and the white community hadn't seen before. A major obstacle for Snipes and his collaborators was name recognition and what the words Black Panther meant to the average film producer in an era before comic book flicks were common. While the Black Panther character had existed since 1966, so had the unrelated civil rights organization with the same name, the Black Panther Party. But the Black Panther character debuted months before the group was formed and has nothing to do with the organization or its politics. The myth that they're linked has proven difficult to shake over the years and was at the root of Snipes' troubles getting the project going. Snipes brought the idea of a proudly Africa-centric Black Panther movie to Boys in the Hood director John Singleton, one of a few directors considered for the project, but ultimately hit a wall when it came to Singleton's wildly differing vision, which centered on the Black Panther Party. Snipes recalled, "John wanted to take the character and put him in the civil rights movement. And I'm like, dude, where's the toys? They are highly technically advanced, and it'll be fantastic to see Africa in this light opposed to how Africa is typically portrayed." Singleton envisioned the film as a story about a superpowered father butting heads with his son over the politics of the Black Panther Party. Ultimately, despite his disappointment, Snipes says he's now able to see the benefit in parting ways. "I love John, but I'm so glad we didn't go down that road, because that would have been the wrong thing to do with such a rich project." At the time, the Marvel brand had only been used for a few movies, and they weren't good. Marvel films of the era are notorious bombs. So it really says something that Snipes courted the attention of some truly legitimate filmmakers and screenwriters for Black Panther. But Snipes says that the timing just wasn't right. Ultimately, we couldn't find the right combination of script and director, and also at the time, we were so far ahead of the game in the thinking, the technology wasn't there to do what they had already created in the comic book. The 2018 adaptation, of course, doesn't share that burden with the slick realization of Wakandan technology Snipes was hoping to bring to the big screen way back in the early 90s.
But I have never seen anything like this. How much more are you hiding?
Though Snipes stayed dedicated to Black Panther through the 90s, he eventually had to move on. But he maintained his close relationship with Marvel and successfully kicked off a different, darker superhero franchise with 1998's Blade. Snipes says the two characters are spiritually related. It was a natural progression and readjustment. They both had nobility. They both were fighters. So I thought, hey, we can't do the King of Wakanda and the Vibranium and the Hidden Kingdom in Africa. Let's do a black vampire. The movie's success would lead Marvel down a path towards starting their own film studio, and we all know what happened next. Far from bitter about his failed attempt at making Black Panther, Snipes says he's thrilled with this incarnation of the Wakandan king. Even though I am not part of this particular project, I support it 1000%, and I am absolutely convinced that it will be a catalyst for change and open other doors and other opportunities.
Okay, so maybe we'll never get to see Galaxy Quest 2, but by Grabthar's hammer, it will be avenged. Galaxy Quest is a rare breed of cult classic sci-fi comedy, one that still holds up more than 20 years after its release. David Mamet, for instance, famously included it alongside The Godfather and A Place in the Sun as one of the only flawless movies in existence. Even the most obvious targets of its biting satire hold the film in high esteem. George Takei once called it a powerful piece of documentary filmmaking. And Patrick Stewart claimed, "No one laughed louder or longer in the cinema than I did." While the film didn't quite set any box office records, earning around $90 million on a $45 million budget, it spent the next couple of decades picking up momentum, becoming a staple in every nerd's Blu-ray collection. Considering that Hollywood has developed a perma-crush on nostalgia-based sequels, Galaxy Quest seems like prime real estate for a reboot, remake, or re-something. Asked by MTV News whether or not they'd come back for another round, Sigourney Weaver pointed out that she still has her costume, while Sam Rockwell simply said, "Yeah, Even Tim Allen was pitching story ideas.
Whew! Your commander is on deck.
So why haven't we been back to the NSEA Protector since 1999? The answer, sadly, is that we've come close more than once, but a confluence of bad luck has kept Galaxy Quest II from reaching our screens. Here's how it went down. By 2015, Galaxy Quest had firmly cemented its place in popular culture, and interested parties started priming the pump for another go-round. The idea was actually to create a streaming series as a follow-up to the original film. It was reported at the time that Amazon Studios had begun development on the project in conjunction with Paramount. The show was even greenlit directly to series, suggesting that it was, at one point, a sure thing.
By Grabthar's hammer. What a savings.
These plans were short-lived, however, as in January of 2016, Galaxy Quest star Alan Rickman died at age 69 from pancreatic cancer. Sam Rockwell saw this, along with Tim Allen's difficult-to-pass availability, as a death knell for the project. Then, in 2017, Deadline reported that Amazon was still developing the series, with Paul Scheer on board as head writer.
The show must go on.
This incarnation was paused for what was initially supposed to be a year, reportedly the result of Paramount TV president Amy Powell's exit from her post. Word of a potential sequel eventually resurfaced in January of 2021, when Tim Allen stated that a new entry in the series was effectively in limbo. He told Entertainment Weekly, "We talk about it all the time. There is constantly a little flicker of butane torch that we could reboot it with." Translation:
Never give up, never surrender.
From a sudden car accident to a disgraced Hollywood producer, there are several shocking reasons why Kill Bill Volume 3 never materialized, and why there's a good chance it never will. Kill Bill Volume 1 is the only one of Quentin Tarantino's movies to get a sequel, so why hasn't it received a threequel? If you're looking for a simple answer, it's that Tarantino is waiting for his stars to grow up a bit. From the very beginning, Tarantino has said that his plan for a potential Volume 3 requires the actors from the original films to be at least 15 years older. Not just the adults like Uma Thurman and Daryl Hannah, but also child actors Perla Haney-Hardine and Ambrosia Kelly. The longer and more complicated answer is that Tarantino's style has evolved over the last 2 decades, and the projects he's made more recently look very different from Kill Bill. Death Proof, part of the 2007 double feature experiment Grindhouse, was the last of his films to have a certain Kill Bill vibe, mostly due to the performance of Thurman's stunt double Zoe Bell as a fictionalized version of herself. From 2009 onward, however, he moved forward with a very different series of revenge films, rewriting historical atrocities with Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. A focus on the literary rather than the visionary has consumed Tarantino's output in the last decade, from the drawing room drama of The Hateful Eight to his novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. As his self-imposed career clock is ticking down, it seems a strong possibility that another Kill Bill sequel just isn't something that interests Tarantino very much anymore. Journalists have been asking Quentin Tarantino about a possible Volume 3 for 2 decades, and the famously gabby director has happily obliged and gleefully fueled the rumors. In 2004, he referred to the possible series as his take on Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, and claimed that his initial plan was to make a sequel every 10 years. Once 10 years had actually passed, though, things had changed. While promoting The Hateful Eight in 2015, Tarantino told Variety, "I'm not committing to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the bride made one more appearance before the whole thing is said and done." Tarantino has also repeatedly stated that he will direct only 10 films. Once he completes that 10th and final film, he will apparently retire from making movies. With every new release in the last few years, he's gotten closer to that self-imposed cutoff, and unless he breaks his vow or finds a loophole, it looks less and less likely that Kill Bill Volume 3 will be included in his filmography. The Kill Bill films are all about revenge, and they center around an important ethical question. Is a desire to seek retribution, to finish unfinished business, ever justified or merely a justification? Beatrix Kiddo sets out to destroy the people who destroyed her life, but she kills an awful lot of other people along the way. Bill even calls her out on it during their final confrontation.
All those people you killed to get to me felt damn good, didn't they?
The bride sliced through dozens of Oren Ishii's bodyguards, not for some high-minded act of cosmic balance, but because she enjoyed doing it. According to Tarantino, a third film would pick up the revenge theme for a new generation. Nikki Bell, daughter of former Deadly Viper Assassination Squad member Vernita Green, seeks revenge against the bride for the death of her mother. Raised and trained by the treacherous Sophie Fatale, whom Beatrix left maimed but alive, Nikki would set out for her own righteous vengeance, facing the bride along with her now-grown daughter Bibi Kiddo.
You can take my word for it. Your mother had it coming.
Back in 2007, series producer E. Bennett Walsh told the audience at the Shanghai Film Festival that the third, and potentially fourth film, might also feature a pair of former henchmen from the first movie, seeking their own revenge against the bride. The first two Kill Bill films leave precious few characters alive by the end, but there are a few actors that would be expected to return in a follow-up. First and foremost, of course, is Beatrix Kiddo herself, Uma Thurman. Julie Dreyfus could also return as Sophia Fatale, as well as Daryl Hannah as the bride's nemesis Ellie Driver, left blinded but alive at the end of Kill Bill Volume 2. Several actors from the films have sadly died in the last 2 decades, including David Carradine and Sonny Chiba. The real question is who would play the now-grown Bibi and Nikki? Part of Quentin Tarantino's plan to wait 15 years was to give actor Ambrosia Kelly time to grow up. In 2004, he told Entertainment Weekly, "It's exciting to know that somewhere there's a little girl who will grow up to be my leading lady." However, Kelly hasn't acted on screen since 2012. And in 2023, Vivica A. Fox said in an interview with Variety that her dream casting for the role of Nikki would be Zendaya. As for Bibi, Perla Haney Hardine remains active in the business, and even had a small role in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In recent years, though, a different candidate has emerged, Thurman's real-life daughter Maya Hawke, who's become a star in her own right. Quentin Tarantino has developed a routine company of sorts over the years, and for a while, Uma Thurman was not just a company player, but a muse and collaborator of the director. The two of them developed the character of the bride while working together on Pulp Fiction. After all, the Deadly Viper Assassination Squad sounds an awful lot like the crime-fighting team in Mia Wallace's TV pilot Fox Force 5.
Fox as in we're a bunch of foxy chicks. Force as in we're a force to be reckoned with. And 5 as in there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us.
However, Thurman and Tarantino have not worked together since Kill Bill Volume 2 came out in 2004, and more than a decade later, one of the possible reasons why came to light. In a 2018 profile in the New York Times, Thurman stated that Tarantino had coerced her into doing an unauthorized automobile stunt. Instructed to drive a convertible down a winding path in Mexico at 40 miles per hour, Thurman lost control of the car and ran off the side of the road, resulting in a concussion and damage to her knees. Footage of the accident was released online after the story dropped, footage which, according to Thurman, Tarantino had fought for years to keep private. In an Instagram post accompanying the profile, Thurman acknowledged that Tarantino finally allowed her to release the footage and said that he feels remorseful about the incident. Even after making amends personally, the two have yet to collaborate again. In the Instagram post featuring footage of Uma Thurman's wreck, she wrote that while she feels the negligent stunt itself was not done with malicious intent, the 15-year cover-up of the accident very much was an act of malice. Thurman laid the blame not at Quentin Tarantino, but squarely at the feet of producers Lawrence Bender, E. Bennett Walsh, and Harvey Weinstein. That wasn't the only thing she accused Weinstein of either. In the 2018 New York Times profile, Thurman claimed that Weinstein sexually assaulted her on 2 different occasions in the 90s, and he threatened to end her career when she confronted him over his actions. She wasn't the only one, as other high-profile stars like Mira Sorvino and Selma Hayek also shared their harrowing stories with the powerful producer. Weinstein ran the Disney-affiliated indie distributor Miramax, and not only produced both Kill Bill movies, but championed and nurtured Tarantino's career from the very beginning. In return, Tarantino's works helped turn Miramax and Weinstein himself into a Hollywood power player and a household name. Tarantino worked with Weinstein on every one of his films from Reservoir Dogs to The Hateful Eight in 2015. And even though he has since distanced himself from the disgraced executive, their longtime friendship casts a shadow over much of Tarantino's work. Kill Bill Volume 3 isn't the only long-awaited Kill Bill project that may never see the light of day. The official narrative from Miramax and Quentin Tarantino has always been that the 2 Kill Bill films were originally intended to be a single 4-hour movie, but it was split into 2 volumes in order to improve its chances at the box office. That may or may not be true. After all, the 2 films are very different from each other in style, and other than Uma Thurman, they have largely different casts. The idea that they were ever meant to form one coherent film is slightly dubious, but nevertheless, Tarantino has dangled the possibility of a combined feature called The Whole Bloody Affair for years. As of 2023, there have only been 2 confirmed public screenings of The Whole Bloody Affair. One was at the Cannes Film Festival in 2004, and the other was a 2-week run in 2011 at the New Beverly Cinema, the Los Angeles theater owned by Tarantino. Reports from those screenings confirm that the combined feature runs mostly the same as what the rest of the world already saw, but with a few differences. The epic fight between the bride and the Crazy 88 gang is presented entirely in color, and certain key scenes and lines have been cut. Despite these tantalizing details, there appear to be no plans to release it publicly again in theaters or on Blu-ray and streaming. I don't see that. My last film was about a film critic, a male critic, and he plays in the 70s. If you're looking for the last word on the subject, that seems pretty final. However, don't give up all hope just yet, as Uma Thurman raised an intriguing possibility when she was asked about it in 2022. She told Fox 5 New York, "All I know is he's always said he's going to make 10, but it doesn't include if he does television. Could Volume 3 show up as a streaming series at some point, like Tarantino's expansion of The Hateful Eight for Netflix in 2019? We'll just have to wait and see whether or not he's decided to pull a little trick on his fans."
Silly rabbit. Tricks are for kids.
Even though rumors have circulated since 2004, it's been years since Kill Bill Volume 3 has had any significant movement. Maybe we actually will see it on the big or small screen at some point, with aged-up stars Perla Haney-Hardine and Ambrosia Kelly, or maybe Maya Hawke and Zendaya at each other's throats. Only time will tell at this point, but if the project never comes to pass, it will at least be in good company. Tarantino seems to enjoy talking about films he will never make as much as actually making films, and the last 3 decades are littered with would-be features that never grew beyond his imagination. For every Inglourious Bastards, there's a double V Vega, which would have brought together John Travolta and Michael Madsen as their well-dressed Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs characters. For every Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there's a 60s set Casino Royale or an R-rated Star Trek sequel that sparks speculation and excitement before fizzling and fading away as he goes in a new direction. Kill Bill Volume 3 may only ever exist in our imaginations, but if it does happen against all odds, we know it'll be a bloody good time.
You'll float too, or will you? Nobody really knows whether we'll ever get to see It Chapter 3, but it's not looking great. Here's why. Since franchise potential is everything these days, many filmmakers end their stories with a hint that audiences might one day return to that world. However, It Chapter 2 stays largely faithful to the source material. Stephen King wrote the novel as a standalone story, with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. And the It film series respects these main beats, even if it takes creative liberties in other sections. In the end, the losers perform a ritual and tear out Pennywise's heart, bringing down the curtain on the unholy clown's reign of terror. Their victory isn't without a cost though, since Eddie dies of his wounds in the final battle, while the friends lost Stan early in the film. In the book, a devastating storm washes over Derry, but this event is missing from the movie, leaving the audience with a more hopeful end to the story. Looking at the narrative from an objective point of view, the story of It is over after Chapter 2. These characters have suffered, overcome, and prevailed after all is said and done. Ultimately, they have arrived at their final destination. While it might be tempting to start a new journey in It Chapter 3, there needs to be a truly compelling reason to revisit Derry and revive Pennywise, especially after he suffered such a final end. While it isn't unusual for different directors to helm various installments in a trilogy, It Chapter 3 wouldn't feel the same without Andy Muschietti. His vision for the series is unique, and his signature horror style can be felt in every part of the movies. To replace him would be akin to replacing the very soul of the film franchise. Unfortunately, Muschietti has never seen It as a 3-film franchise. Even after the incredible success of the 2017 film, the filmmaker explained how there was never any intention to stretch out the story longer than necessary. He told Variety how he had read about the trilogy idea, but insisted there was never any discussion about it. Muschietti said, "I understand why they would think that because New Line originally split up The Hobbit into 3 movies instead of 2. But to be honest, there wasn't a conversation about that, and now we are designing the story as one single film." It's also telling that the studio resisted the temptation to make an extra film and squeeze more money out of the franchise, especially after the impressive box office haul of the first movie.
And that's a picture wrap on Bill Skarsgård that's given the hand.
A return to Derry wouldn't be complete without the return of Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise. While there was initially some debate surrounding whether Skarsgård would do the character justice, no one can dispute the actor put his own menacing twist on Stephen King's infamous demon. And despite having 2 It movies under his belt, it appears as if Skarsgård wasn't ready to let the dancing clown go yet either. After the release of It Chapter 2, Skarsgård revealed to Joe Blow how he and Andy Muschietti had discussed the possibility of a 3rd film. Both of them acknowledged how it would need to be an entirely original story, since they had mostly covered the events of the novel. Skarsgård said, "There are a few ideas floating around. I feel like I've done what I can with the incarnation of Pennywise as we know of him, so I think it would be a cool idea to change up a few things. So without going into too much detail, there is a story that we're kind of excited about, but it's way too early to say." Who knows the story of It better than anyone else? The author of the novel, of course, Stephen King. While a continuation of it has never materialized in the literary world, the writer has shown he isn't afraid of returning to his former stomping grounds when inspiration strikes. Most recently, he released Dr. Sleep, the sequel to 1977's The Shining, 36 years after the original. Many fans wonder if he will give It the same treatment, especially taking into account Pennywise's place in pop culture's zeitgeist. Appearing on Bloody Disgusting's Losers Club podcast, King acknowledged how Pennywise is closely tied to his own legacy as a writer, even joking about how the clown will one day eclipse him. That being said, he isn't itching to get back into this world.
Well, I don't have a relationship with Pennywise now because I have no intention of going back to it.
King revealed some further context about the upcoming Welcome to Derry series, stating it will be a prequel set before the events of the first movie and explore the backstory of Pennywise. The author wasn't opposed to the idea either, admitting there are more than a few intriguing storytelling possibilities to explore in the future. Gary Doberman has built up a formidable reputation as one of the hottest horror filmmakers in Hollywood. He wrote all of the Annabelle movies and even directed the third entry in the franchise, Annabelle Comes Home. Doberman also had a hand in shaping the direction of the It film series, co-writing the first film and taking on the whole screenplay for Chapter 2. Doberman also has his own ideas of how a potential It Chapter 3 could develop the story further and tackle King's rich lore. Speaking to comicbookmovie.com, Doberman discussed how the two movies are limited to how much mythology can be covered and insisted there is a lot more to explore, especially in terms of the antagonist. He said, "There are definitely elements of the novel you could expand on and make its own movie. It's just a question of whether or not people want to see it. But I do think it was on this planet for a very, very, very long time, and there's a lot of bloodshed and a lot of stories to tell, and I think you could do that for sure." For all intents and purposes, the cosmic entity known as It is dead. After the ritual in which Pennywise had his heart ripped out, this should be a done and dusted case of ding dong, the clown is gone. However, this is the horror genre, where death is anything but final. There are several ways of bringing back Pennywise, and it's up to the writers to figure out how. Regardless of how it's done, it's important to revive the main antagonist of the franchise, whether it comes back in the form of a clown or something else entirely. Considering the importance of 27-year intervals to the story, It's Chapter 3 should take place 27 years later, and in Derry, of course. Nobody in the Losers Club has any kids, so this could also be a chance to pass the mantle to a new group of characters to carry the story forward. Naturally, one or two of the original losers could return and help out, but a third installment should offer a brand new journey for brand new characters, not a rehash of what came before. So what would the cast look like for a third It movie? Well, if Andy Muschietti helms It's Chapter 3, it's obvious that there must be one name at the top of the cast list, Bill Skarsgård. Taking on this version of the story would feel strange without Skarsgård's involvement, even if he portrays another incarnation of the character.
Time to float.
In addition, it will be essential to bring back at least one of the surviving losers. In terms of sheer drawing power and star credentials, that instantly points to two actors, Jessica Chastain and James McAvoy. Considering that Chastain's Bev married Jay Ryan's Ben at the end of It Chapter 2, it's also likely that he would make an appearance alongside her. Regardless of who is chosen, it will play into the movie's strengths to include at least one of the original characters from the beloved group. That's assuming, of course, that any of these actors would be willing and available to return for Chapter 3. As with any fandom, there are mixed feelings among fans about continuing the story of It. A good portion of the audience has read Stephen King's novel and likely believes that the largely faithful adaptation captures the book's tone and message, meaning there is absolutely no need to beat this dead clown over and over again. At the same time, there are others who are curious about how the story could continue and explore more about Pennywise, as long as it is done in a gripping manner and doesn't embarrass the source material. In one thread posted on Reddit, both sides of the fandom aired their opinions about whether or not the franchise should continue. One commenter suggested that the very notion of It Chapter 3 is terrible fan service and insisted that there is no need to continue the story. They even argued that a third movie could turn Pennywise into more of a caricature than a monster. Another Redditor said it's the Losers Club that is the heart and soul of It, meaning a third movie would feel weird without them as the main characters. One user saw both sides of the argument, writing, "Part of me wants to see more Pennywise, but the other part remembers that it was the cast as a whole that made me love Chapter 1 and 2. Plus, a little bit of mystery in the origin of Pennywise is what makes the character interesting." It was no secret that Warner Brothers have been eyeing a prequel for It since the release of Chapter 2. Perhaps that's no surprise, considering the fans reacted so positively to the scene in which Pennywise is shown in his human form without any clown makeup, hinting there might be more to his past connection with the town of Derry.
Close your eyes, Bev.
And sure enough, in February 2023, it was finally confirmed that the horror story will continue as a prequel series for Max titled Welcome to Derry. According to an article published by The Hollywood Reporter, this prequel comes from the minds of Andy and Barbara Muschietti and Jason Fuchs. It will reveal more of Derry and explore why the town is so rife with sinister happenings. Fuchs and Brad Caleb Kane are set to be co-showrunners for the show, while Muschietti is scheduled to direct multiple episodes. Taking into account Andy Muschietti's involvement in Welcome to Derry, it's looking highly unlikely that It's Chapter 3 will ever materialize, at least not as a movie. that being said, Muschietti has admitted that he would like to do something different with the two It films, helping to create a supersized version of both of these features, as well as something a little more. Chatting with Cinema Blend, the filmmaker explained how he wants to include what was shot and omitted from the theatrical cuts, while also filming new footage. He said, "I am thinking of a supercut, which is basically the two movies told one after the other, adding everything that was lifted from them in length purposes. Great scenes that are more character moments, or things that we had to lift for other reasons. I'm also very excited about shooting extra material." For fans, this might sound like an interesting proposition in the same vein of the Lord of the Rings extended editions. Neither It film was particularly short either. The first movie clocked in at 135 minutes, while the sequel was longer at 169 minutes, meaning this supercut could become a behemoth of a feature. Who knows? Maybe with all the cutscenes and additional footage, this could be considered a kind of third chapter in the It story.